But the truth is, there's a very small number of mostly white men that are concentrating wealth and power, and that's true. Like that. That's not a lie. That's a truth. And it's also true that the vast majority of white men are suffering in the very same system that's screwing everybody is also screwing them.
When we talk about our shared humanity, we're often talking about people with power and privilege, recognizing the humanity of people who are marginalized in some way. The challenge to that is that if we're always talking about our shared humanity, we're also talking about all the people, even the people we perceive to have power and privilege. What's interesting in the United States is that our distribution of wealth and real privilege is not just along racial lines. That, yes, white men have the most power, white men have the most money, white men are in the highest positions. But the number of white men who are in those positions is very small compared to the number of white men in the United States who are not benefiting from our economy, from the political system. And one of the things we're missing in our quest for equity, for justice, is bringing white men into the conversation, white men of all social classes, of all geographies, into the conversation, instead of painting them with the broader brush of the people who are the problem. Coming up, we're going to talk with J. Coen Gilbert, the founder of White Men for Racial Justice, among several other things, which you'll hear about, where we talk about the work he's doing to support white men in understanding where they fit into this picture, in wrestling with their own biases, and also in addressing the pain they feel and the rejection they're feeling in the environment where the conversation is about racial justice. So settle in. This is going to be a good one. I'm Dr. Adriane Johnson-Williams, and this is Equitable. Hello, Jay. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Adrian. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, and I'm so thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you making the time.
Oh, well, likewise. I appreciate you.
So, the first thing we want to do is have you introduce yourself to the audience. So, who is J. Coen Gilbert as a human being? Who are you?
I am a human becoming because I'm not quite fully formed at the moment, and enjoying the journey of being a lifelong learner and someone who's trying really hard to dial down the certainty that comes with the socialization of being a rich white dude, and and dial up the curiosity as someone who's born into that body, but and that amount of wind at my back, and trying to understand a little bit of the world better from other perspectives, because we tend to see things from where we're sitting, and I'm only sitting in one position on the train. There's lots of other people on the train. I want to try to see things from their point of view. But I'm also a husband of 30 years. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And got two, adulting kids in their mid 20s, finding their way through the world and doing great. And a son of two entrepreneurs. And there's more to that. There's more to that sort of origin story that sort of explains a bit about like what drives me, and both for good and for bad. That's a little bit about who I am, Adrian.
So, how do you spend your time, Jay, professionally? I know you got a lot of different things going on.
I like to say that I haven't really worked a day since I was about 25. So I'm going on my a little bit more than my 30th anniversary of not really having a job, which means that I've been lucky enough to have had in my third vocation. The first run was building a basketball footwear and apparel company called And One with my best friends, and was lucky enough that some smart guys with some hard work and a lot of other wind at our backs, had a successful run with that company. Sold that in 2005, and then for the last 20 years, been running, building a community of businesses called B corporations, and there are about 10,000 of those companies in about 100 countries all around the world that are trying to redefine success in business, so that companies are competing not only to be best in the world, but to be best for the world. And it was sort of on that journey that discovered pretty accidentally what maybe my third and final act of the play, which is feeling called into justice work, particularly racial and economic justice work. And that's through an organization, a national network of now close to 800 men around the country that are part of a community called White Men for Racial Justice. And I'm spending pretty much all my time now in that work because it feels like uh, I need to start swimming a little bit further upstream of the culture that uh, that creates the conditions to create these systems and structures that are good for some, but not great for most. And so that's led me in that direction of looking at racial advantage and gender advantage and a class advantage, and how all three of those things play together in our culture to reinforce hierarchies that are pretty unhealthy for us as individuals and pretty unhealthy for us as a democracy and pretty unhealthy for us as an economy. And so at every levels of the fractal, this culture that seeks to separate us from each other is doing a good job at that. And it's hurting us and it's hurting me, and so that's what I'm spending my time on.
I'm curious about what you mean about going farther upstream. So, what does that mean for you?
I grew up sort of in a business world. I was a consultant at McKinsey and Company and the kinds of folks who read Harvard Business Review and go to B school and stuff like that. And there's a famous management consultant whose words are often repeated, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that's in the business context means you could have the greatest strategy written out on paper and the smartest people in the world, but if you have a culture that moves contrary to that purpose, the culture is going to win
Yeah, every time.
every time.
Hmm.
Um, and I've certainly experienced that in business. The truth of that, what I hadn't really grappled with was how deeply held cultural values or like a paradigm of how we see the world actually um, constrains our behavior and constrains the public policies that we're willing to support. Um, and so we're right now watching 50, 70 years worth of civil rights laws uh, get washed away. Um, and that's because the culture didn't change sufficiently. And not just the pointy hat, you know, cross burning part of the culture, because while there's a bit of ugly resurgence of overt racism and misogyny and things like that, it's still mostly the quiet kind that gets us.
Yeah, when I talk to people about this, I talk about it in the language of mental models, that those very deep attitudes and beliefs that are fundamentally how we go through the world, how we make sense of the world. And I have recently been talking about helping people to think about why we're able to have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and all of those things that we've gained go away, because we did use interest convergence in that period to say what are the ways that we can get these rights in an era where there's very serious segregation, where most of the people in Congress really do believe in the country the way it is right now in that time. And and the challenge is that you can change a policy, but until you really dig in and change people's attitudes and beliefs, which is, you're talking about it as culture, it really it it is temporary. And we don't know when the clock's going to run out, but our clock's run out right now.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So mental models, attitudes and beliefs, worldviews, I think we're all saying the same thing.
Why did you start? Like, what inspired you to start White Men for Racial Justice? And what are you trying to accomplish?
What we're trying to accomplish is to change the way white men see themselves and to change the way people see white men. And that means that we've got to build a culture of white men for white men that where we can care for each other, feel cared for, so that we can better care for others. And the one of the like dirty little secrets is that white men are suffering, and that feels I can not yours because I'm looking at you, but like I can imagine a lot of listeners are eyes rolling, and understandably so because white men still hold disproportionate seats of power and influence and control in pretty much every aspect of our society, and so the idea that white men are suffering goes against like what we at some level what we see, and we feel like we're being gaslit if someone tells us that. But the truth is, there's a very small number of mostly white men that are concentrating wealth and power, and that's true. Like that's not a lie. That's a truth. And it's also true that the vast majority of white men are suffering in the very same system that screwing everybody is also screwing them. And as a just as a not as a percentage, but as a number, absolute number, that's a lot of white men that are poor, working class, struggling. Life expectancies for white men in the United States are going down, and folks are self-medicating with drugs, alcohol, and taking themselves out with suicide at alarming rates. And that's a sign of an unhealthy community that that's feeling hopeless and despair, like they can't play the role that they've been told they're supposed to play, which is traditional provider, protector. And if you feel like you can do neither, and then you're going to get blamed for everything, and you're feeling some shame at not being able to do those things that you're supposed to do, and then you're getting blamed for the situation you're in, that can lead to a lot of self-doubt, a lot of insecurity, and as we know from every playground that we've ever grown up on, the most insecure kid is usually the most dangerous kid because they're going to front. And I think that's a bit doesn't explain everything, but I think it explains a fair amount of what's going on right now. And so we've got to create some spaces where white guys can uh, be brave with each other, have the courage to tell the truth about how they're feeling, and be vulnerable. Because we're told to like man up,
And be isolated.
yeah, and suck it up, like play over pain, whether it's in sports or whatever, and that's and so we're told to basically stuff it, stuff our feelings, and that's not really healthy. Um, and so trying to create spaces for white guys to come together and talk about this stuff that's causing them pain, and then reminding ourselves where is that pain coming from, and say it's not coming from below or from the sides, it's coming from up above, and let's focus on the folks that are perpetuating a system of harm, and let's focus our energy there. And so what got me into this was sort of realizing that I was feeling disconnected and in pain. And then as I was looking, this is around 2016, and I was seeing, I saw a white guy give a forearm shiv to a black man at a Trump rally in broad daylight. And it was pretty well recorded, documented scene. And what got me was not so much the blatant racialized violence, but when the cameras caught up with the guy after the rally, he didn't hide, he didn't pull his hat down over his eyes and pull his collar up over his eyes so you couldn't see him and kinda skulk away. No, no, he raised his cap, looked right into the camera, and said it proudly and with a smile. So, "Oh, yeah, that was me. I just gave my friend a little beak on the nose." And I was like, "Oh, damn, we are in a new moment right now where a white man feels that emboldened that he can clock a black man in the face in broad daylight and assume he's going to get away with it and there will be 0 consequences for that." Uh, and it's only gotten worse from there. But that was a moment where I could feel in my gut, I could feel in my body, uh, "Oh, we're heading to a place where you're gonna have to make a decision as to what risk you're willing to take for the values that you say that you believe in." And you went to college and you read all about the freedom rides and the white students who were down there and Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney and Jim Zwerg and James Peck, and you think of yourself as one of those guys, and we're gonna find out because you're about to step into a place where, that you've not been before and where our country hasn't been in a couple generations. And so it was at that moment that I realized that I needed to check in with myself and see what I was really prepared for and, who I was really willing to stand with and, what I was willing to risk, whether it's my reputation or my social circles or making people uncomfortable, let alone getting popped in the nose or worse, what would it mean to be standing in solidarity with folks who are in harm's way? That's where it started. So that's almost 10 years ago, this summer. And it's been a slow, meandering, journey full of failures and missteps and dead ends, but I'm committed to keep walking, and finding others to walk with me on this because it's the one thing that I'm very clear about is I can't, I need to walk with other people. This stuff is much too hard to do alone. And I need some brothers to walk with me and some brothers and sisters to hold me accountable and to pick me up when I'm feeling down or, help me lick my wounds when I make a mistake and, tell me, dude, you got to get up. We hear you. That's not that, you sobbing in a corner isn't helping anybody. Let's get going, pick yourself up and let's roll. And so that's been really helpful to me to find a community to do that with. But that's what catalyzed Adrian was that 2016 visual, some other stuff along the way, but that was the big thing that kinda woke me up.
There's something in what you said that is just really powerful to me. And in my own work, one of the things that I've highlighted is if we're really going to dig deep in a lot of the issues that are going on, we really have to focus on white men. Like there needs to be more of a conversation around this, but it can't just be the work that one, I think the work that white men do among yourselves is really important work and it's vital and it's the most important work. I think it's also true that everyone else needs to also understand what's happening because the volume at which and the degree to which we are really quick to blame white men like for everything as a group is really not helpful for us. And something you said that's really important is that the percentage of white men who really have the power that we're talking about is actually quite small. And that what I know during the mid 20th century civil rights movement, there were efforts to create racial, interracial solidarity across issues of social class because the greatest number of poor people in the United States are white. The face of white poverty is white women. The working class that often provided people a great deal of economic security is pretty much being wiped out by, because of manufacturing and some of the other kind of energy work that used to happen, coal mining and those kinds of things. Um, how do you help people to understand, really dig into that truth? That you are, that while it is true that white men have the most power and have the greatest position, all that kind of stuff, that the work really isn't about being angry that you don't get those benefits, but knowing that you were never going to get those benefits, and that your people are actually the people who are struggling with the same things you are.
I think the thing that's been most powerful, which has come slowly to me personally, is um, leading with stories, not stats. And starting by recognizing or honoring people's pain and not leading with a conversation about privilege, you know, because you're talking to somebody who's struggling to put food on the table, feels like they're going backwards from where their parents were, or feels like they're playing by all the rules and still not getting ahead. And if your first word is you need to check your privilege and stop being so fragile, that conversation is not going to go very far, and understandably so, because um, we talk about feeling gaslit, like that notion if someone who's been marginalized or oppressed or been at the receiving end of X, Y, or Z, and then someone says, "Well, really, not really. That's not what I see." Then you feel like you're denying my own lived experience. And we're if you've been doing equity work, you've heard that plenty when it comes to talking about Black women or talking about LGBT or talking about other marginalized groups. The same thing is true. Apply that same lens to a poor white person who grew up in a trailer park or in just a low income community who's been struggling and then is being fed the false narrative. I want to make sure it's clear, the false narrative that other people are eating their cookies, and taking something that's rightfully theirs. And if you're in pain, a lot of what you're looking for is just for A, to stop the pain, and B, for someone to blame. And so the easy way out is to tap into deep-seated unconscious bias that we've grown up in from the movies we watch or the cartoons we watch or the books we read or the culture, just the air we breathe. It's not making anybody a bad person. Again, not about pointy hats and earning crosses and, being on a white citizens council. It's just like we grow up in a society where we equate a Black man with a gun is dangerous and a white man with a gun is a protector. And if you hold up the scales of violence, it's not close who's been the greater perpetrator of violence, but that's not the image that we're fed. And so that's not my fault that that's what I'm being fed. It's not my fault that that's the first thing that comes up to me is a fear reaction. That's biological fear reaction. I'm trying to keep myself safe, my family safe. Like, you're not wrong for feeling that way. What we're trying to do is to like interrupt that electric circuit so we're not like firing on automatic cylinders, and we're like, oh, why am I feeling that way? Have I actually experienced that? Or is that just something that is like been planted? It's a seed that's been planted there, that's been like activated. And what most men are willing to acknowledge is, hey, I do have some of those thoughts. And, and so I can be in a room where I can acknowledge that and not feel like I'm going to get hated on. And then I can work through that with other guys who say, yeah, but why do I think that? Well, let me just think about that. Why am I thinking? Why do I feel my body tense up when I see that image? And being able to have that conversation, having the spaciousness and a supportive group that you can have that conversation with, has been really helpful. And so men are able to say, you know what, I have struggled and I have worked hard, but where I've struggled, it's not because of my whiteness. It's not because of my maleness. Doesn't mean I haven't struggled, but it's not because of those things. And I can appreciate that other people may have struggled similarly from a class background, from not have come from a lot financially or economically, but they then also had to overcome things that I know I don't have to overcome, which is, I know I'm generally presumed to be competent. I know I'm generally presumed to be trustworthy. I know I'm generally presumed to be hardworking. I'm generally presumed to be worthy of being in the room. And that isn't the case for many people that aren't born into the particular body that I was born into, which of course I had nothing to do with, just luck of the draw, you know? And so once men are able to see that it's a yes and, you know, yes, you worked hard and it's not been a level playing field. Yes, you're a good guy, and maybe, you know, there's sometimes where your thoughts don't always align with your actions, even if unintended, you know? Once you're acknowledging the yes and not trying to, like, play shame and blame, you can see the shoulders kinda drop or the jaws unclench, and people are willing to go, "Okay, all right, let me think about that," you know? Let me and that's a huge step. "Let me think about that," is a huge step. So that's kinda how what I've seen over the last 5.5 years with white men for racial justice, watch that kind of process go from skepticism to curiosity, from curiosity to interest, from interest to commitment, and from abstraction to making it personal. And it's that combination that gets people engaged and has them stay engaged.
Really appreciate you focusing on that cognitive process of bias because I know that there's some sense of self-righteousness among people who are like, I'm not biased. I don't mistreat people because of identity. And it's just like, no, you are. Just because you've learned how to interrupt your bias, you've like, that ladder of inference, you've learned how to cut it off and make different decisions doesn't mean it's not there. It's there for every single one of us. And that it's important, I think, for everyone to recognize that that's how it works. What do you know how to interrupt it or not? Do you acknowledge it or not? Do you even understand it's happening?
And that's been hard. And I think the one of the like for me, like I've got a bunch of these little like call them my truth stories where like I've had to think through like, oh, you know what? Like I did here's an example, or here's another example of how I grew up, or my first job, or whatever it is. I'm like, oh, yeah, I was carrying that around. I presume that my manager at the mayor's office was an affirmative action hire because he was a black man and he was working for a black mayor. And my presumption was based upon how I perceived him versus the white deputy mayor. I was like, oh, he must be an affirmative action hire. And I didn't know jack squat about him. And I didn't even, and worse, more ridiculously, is I didn't even like take into consideration that I only got that job because my dad introduced me to the director of the office. My dad is a white man, introduced me to the director of the office, who was another white man. And that's how I got, and oh, by the way, that guy hired me without having put me through any interview process with anybody else in the office. But I'm some snot-nosed 24-year-old come out of McKinsey and Stanford University. Of course I belong here. I deserve, like, he's lucky to have me, of course, because I'm, you know, and I'm bringing all this judgment and not realizing, wait, who's the affirmative action hire here? Like, no, you mean like, and so like just even, and it took a couple decades before I actually could see that. And that was only after like looking around and opening, old drawers and looking under some rocks and like looking for like, where has that shown up in my life? And I was like, oh, let me think through. And I was like, oh, wow. No, that is how I thought about it. And then I realized the things I wasn't thinking was I wasn't ever looking in the mirror. So anyway, that's like one example. And so like someone being able to share that in a room of other white men enables other white men to go, oh, damn, he said it. Well, maybe I wonder if that's similar to how I thought about X, or I wonder, but it just sort of, it raises the bar on vulnerability and admitting that no lightning bolt came out of the sky and like struck me dead. I'm still walking around. I'm still welcomed in the work, and all of a sudden people can say, oh, I can acknowledge those things and not get burned, um, because it's actually, I've built trust with people as I've been able to acknowledge those things. And what we're mostly afraid of is losing trust or losing credibility. And in fact, by admitting when I was, the screwed up things I've done, It's actually I can feel, and maybe credibility is the wrong word, but I can feel trust flowing in my direction, uh, not like a blank check, but just like, "Oh, okay. I see you, like, I appreciate that you're working on it, and I can see that, and, like, alright, Imma keep an eye on it, but, like, I know you're willing to hear it if you step in it again." And then all of a sudden, somebody calls you in, it's a gift because they believe you can be better and that you wanna be better, instead of basically writing you off and not saying anything, because 'cause you've probably been messing up. I know I've been messing up for years, and no one has said jack because I was in a position of power and people were afraid, you know? And so by acknowledging some of that, it helps lower the drawbridge a little bit and help people, cross over into more authentic relationship, and my life is more fun, and I'm more effective at what I do, like, both are true, like, they're not at odds with each other, you know?
I'm really regretting we're running out of time because now I wanna have a whole conversation about meritocracy, but, um, we don't
Mara
really have
who?
time to get into that
Yeah. Let me know
because
when we
that's a
get
big
one.
thing too.
Let me know when we have one. That would
Yes.
that's the one-liner on meritocracy. I'd be
Yeah.
thrilled if we had one.
Yes. So, um, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I want to have you provide your definition of equity. What's your definition of equity, and how does it show up in your life and work?
The best definition of equity that I've heard is making sure that everybody gets what they need to succeed. And what you need is different than what I need. My son needs something different than my daughter, and my job is to give them each what they need to succeed. And to reach their full potential is another way to say it is, and not everybody has the same skills, not everybody has the same ambition, not everybody has the same work ethic, all that's true, and so everybody's potential isn't the same, um, but we're pretty far away from true equality of opportunity, and that's not only at the starting gate, but that's all along the way, and so for me, equity is given making sure I'm doing my part to give everybody what they need to succeed. And, so that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you for that. So, Jay Coen Gilbert, if people want to follow you and learn more about your work, where can they locate you out there in the inner world, the
Right.
interwebs?
Totally, totally. Well, my email is jay@wmrj.org, White Men for Racial Justice, WMRJ.org. That's the easiest way to find me. And you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty open, accessible human. And so people should feel free to reach out if they'd like to learn more, talk about the work with white men, talk about the work with the B Corp movement, or if they just want to talk about the old A1 mixtapes. I'm probably less interested in talking about the old A1 mixtapes, although they're a lot of fun. But I'm more interested in the other things and trying to figure out what we can do to make sure the economy works for everybody and for the long term, and that we have a culture that supports everybody to thrive.
Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here. This has been great.
Oh, Adrian, thanks so much. I feel honored to have been asked to talk with you and appreciate you very much.